Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar. In today's presentation, our speakers will be introducing what's new in the latest release of Lucidworks Fusion 5.0. Today's presenters are Tim Potter and Aaliyah Abed. Tim is the Chief Architect here at Lucidworks, heading up our cloud engineering efforts, and he is also an Apache Lucene Solar committer. Aaliyah is the Director of Product Marketing here at Lucidworks. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that we will be taking questions live from the audience at the end of the session. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. Our speakers will do their best to answer your questions live. And if we don't get to your question today, a member of the Lucidworks team will reach out to you. Thanks again for joining, everyone, and now let's kick it off to Aaliyah.
Thanks, Janessa. Hello, everyone. My name is Aaliyah Abed, and I am the Director of Product Marketing here at Lucidworks. As Janessa mentioned, we'll be walking you through our new release of Fusion today, which is Fusion 5.0. I'll cover a very brief company and product overview for those of you who are not familiar with Lucidworks and Fusion first. Then I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of Fusion 5, and I'll pass it over to Tim to go a little bit deeper into the technical details of Fusion 5. As Janessa mentioned, we'll have some time for questions at the end as well. So for those of you who don't know Lucidworks, we are a search and AI company. We help the world's largest organizations make their most valuable data work for their customers and their employees. So our solutions typically fit into two areas. One is digital commerce and one is digital workplace. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And we offer Lucidworks Fusion, which is a platform that hyper-personalizes digital experiences. We have just over 250 employees, and we have over 400 engagements across the Fortune 2000. So we have a lot of big customers. We're also the sponsoring company for Apache Solar. We're headquartered in San Francisco, California. We have another major U.S. office in North Carolina, and global offices in the UK, India, and Hong Kong. As I mentioned, we have over 400 deployments across the Fortune 2000, and in those deployments and experiences, we began to see some themes. These themes probably won't surprise you. One of them is that personalization is expected. So whether it's in digital commerce, where someone's shopping online and they want to receive recommendations and search results that are closest to what they're looking for, or in the digital workplace, where we log into an application and we want to find information that's relevant to us quickly. So we're starting to see that in the workplace, we want our customers and our customers' customers want experiences that are reflective of what their consumer life is like. And the other trend is that AI is a priority. So we use AI to power these personalized experiences, and we're seeing across our customer base, AI is kind of becoming a table stakes conversation. And we've got an initiative to make sure that the customers who have AI are really leveraging the power that AI can bring to their applications. So we support these trends by providing hyper-personalized experiences to workers and shoppers. And in the workplace, hyper-personalization means to maximize the opportunity to tailor content that fits each and every employee's wants and needs. So employees want information quickly that will help take them to the next best action. And we work with workplace applications ranging from customer support to fraud detection. So we help both increase employee engagement and help your employees service customers better. An example of that is Red Hat. So Red Hat is a customer of ours. They chose Lucidworks Fusion to power their customer support portal, make self-service help easier for customers so that tickets could be resolved more quickly, sometimes not even needing to include a support agent. And in that implementation of Fusion, they saw an increase in click-through rates on their support portal of 200%, and they saw 50,000 fewer support tickets. They also had a 91% reduction in total cost of ownership in switching from their previous solution. And then moving over to the digital commerce, for digital commerce applications, hyper-personalization means tailoring the shopping experience to match each and every shopper's wants and needs. And doing so increases KPIs like add to cart, average order value, and click-through rate, essentially improving revenue. So here's another case study of a Fortune 500 computer retailer. They use Fusion across various sites from B2C, B2B, and private sites across 88 countries and using 36 languages. They've had significant improvements in click-through rates and actually were able to attribute a 170% increase in search-based revenue. And this is just within 1 year. So in subsequent years, they've been able to increase these numbers even more, and they're continually adding new AI features that are helping as well. So how do we do this? I'll briefly just cover the Lucidworks Fusion platform. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but as we've been talking about hyper-personalized experiences and AI, I want to show you how the Fusion platform handles data and curates it for the end user. So Fusion is extremely flexible. We can take data from any platform in any format at scale, and we ingest it through the platform. So we have AI both on the ingest and the query side. On the ingest side, we use AI for things like clustering and classification and natural language processing to really prepare that data. And then on the query side, we predict user intent to surface the most relevant results to the user. So as you can see, AI is stitched throughout the whole process. Fusion App Studio is a UI builder that helps organizations quickly build beautiful front-end applications. And all of this is surfaced to better personalized experience in your digital workplace and digital commerce apps. So that's just a little bit about Fusion. Now to get into what today's session is actually about, Fusion 5. So we are introducing with Fusion 5 microservices, a tighter data science integration, and a predictive merchandising tool, which I will talk a little bit more about. So Tim will get into the kind of nitty-gritty about the new architecture and technical details, but just quickly at a high level, Fusion 5 is a cloud-native release for us. We're super excited about that. It's orchestrated by Kubernetes, so you can deploy whether you're using Kubernetes on-prem or in any cloud environment. This brings auto-scale capabilities, which I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of that next. Also easier deployment, and then we have now native support for Python ML, which gives us a much tighter integration with data science tools. So the takeaway here is that we're trying to make Fusion easier to use and fit more closely into your existing stacks. I'm sure that if you're not already using Kubernetes, you're probably thinking about using it. To touch a little bit more on the data science integration, so we now have native support for Python in Fusion. So as you saw, the AI on both the ingest and the query side, that translates to the Python integration as well. So your data scientists can continue to work within their existing toolkits, whether it be Spacey, TensorFlow, Scikit-learn. Fusion will integrate directly with those tools. So your data scientists will be happy because they don't have to export anything and help you figure out how to get your custom models into your search application. It's automatically integrated. So this is faster time to value for you to bring in ML and increase relevance, and it also increases productivity of everyone who would be involved in trying to export those custom models. And then the Lucidworks Predictive Merchandiser, this is an add-on solution for e-commerce. We will do another webinar on this on October 10th. We'll give you more information about that at the end of this session. But essentially, it's a visual tool for merchandisers to create and manage rules. So in previous versions of Fusion, any rules management was done via code, and merchandisers would have to work with IT in order to implement and change rules. So now they can do it on their own. It enables them to be self-service, and it eliminates those tedious workflows of having to push rules via IT. So we're really excited about this, and we hope all of our e-commerce folks will join us for the next webinar on that. So I just want to sum up the benefits of Fusion 5 in the context of digital workplace and digital commerce, and then I will pass it off to Tim. But just quickly, so in the digital workplace, you're constantly adding applications, adding users, adding data. Fusion 5 and its cloud-native architecture makes that a lot easier. You can add data without the risk or fear that your entire system's going to go down or something's going to crash or not scale. So the microservices and auto-scaling help with that. Auto-scaling also allows you to manage your resources and costs and only use what you need. An example in the digital workplace would be that you scheduled provisioning of resources to go down, say, Friday afternoon when everyone goes home and back up on Monday morning. So you're not using the same hardware over the weekend that you use during the week. And then again, with the data science integration toolkit integration, it provides more relevant results, more ML through the entire user experience. And for digital commerce, auto-scaling benefit there. It's also a benefit there, and you can auto-scale for events like Black Friday or other promotions where you know your traffic will be high. This really eliminates the risk of your system going down and you losing revenue on an important day and customer loyalty. And then with the data science tools, you can seamlessly improve product relevance, again, getting customers the most relevant products and increasing your revenue. And the predictive merchandiser brings more control to merchandisers to really curate that search and browse experience. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tim to cover the technical details of Fusion 5.
Great, thank you, Aaliyah. So in my role as the chief architect, I in addition to working with engineering teams and senior leadership, also get the sort of pleasure to go out and meet with customers and prospects and sort of hear about what your initiatives are and sort of how Fusion needs to fit better into that. So through this deep dive today, I want to touch on a couple of the key points that I've seen as themes that have come up in my discussions with customers and prospects. And some of these are pretty obvious as far as like wanting to just have a more flexible deployment, whether it's on cloud or on premises. And there we'll see the use of microservices and Kubernetes, as Aaliyah said, but also things like moving faster. I don't have to tell you that the problems we're being asked to solve as search engineers and data scientists and data engineers are only getting more complex and harder. And for me, really the way to tackle that is to break it down and iterate faster and sort of fail faster, as they would say. And so what we'll see with Fusion 5 is it's now a platform that allows you to actually move very quickly, iterate, but without the additional risk, because it doesn't do us any good to say, change the system and then introduce a bunch of risk from those changes. And so we'll see that by us adopting microservices and Kubernetes, we'll be able to actually change the system very rapidly with low risk. And I think that's very important. And then as Aaliyah mentioned, sort of auto-scaling is one of these things. It sounds very cool, but it can be something as simple as saying, we're coming into the holiday season. We want to be able to just schedule some additional capacity, right? And so we don't need this sophisticated dynamic auto-scaling. We just want to add a node. Well, Kubernetes allows that to happen very seamlessly without any risk and really without involving IT in any kind of complex manner. Or as Aaliyah mentioned, sort of, hey, Friday night, the digital workplace capacity needs sort of go down so we can spin down some hardware and save some money, especially if you're running in the cloud where you're paying by the hour, for example. Okay, so before I go ahead and get into Fusion 5, I think we could really spend the whole 45 minutes here talking about Kubernetes. But what I want to do is sort of just give some insights on what I've seen resonates with our business users and things like that. Clearly, if you go out on Google or go to conferences, there's just a ton of hype around Kubernetes. We just had our annual conference, Activate, and the whole conference was a buzz about Kubernetes. There were several sessions packed, the standing room only. A lot of companies are looking to this platform to help them scale and manage operations and control costs and all these things. So there's really a lot of hype out there. But I think the hype in this case is justified, and we see this a lot in our industry where, it's, oh, now you're doing it wrong, you have to get on Kubernetes. But I think for me, a couple of things that I've seen is, first, it really allows us to sort of bake in best practices of operating distributed systems, into just essentially codify processes and tools, right? So rather than having to guess, and this was a common theme with previous versions of Fusion, was, well, how do we now scale Fusion and operate Fusion at scale? And there was a lot of guesswork and a lot of just sort of do it yourself and, sort of trial and error, I would say. Well, now with Kubernetes, we can ship a complex distributed system like Fusion with all of the processes that Lucidworks and our engineers have come up with on how to scale Fusion properly and how to operate it so that it's not going to go down and it remains highly available. And so those are baked in now to Fusion on Kubernetes. And I think that's an important thing because it really makes it easier to run. And the other thing is, and we've seen, and I'm sure, if you're interested in this webinar, you probably have some interest around Kubernetes outside of running Fusion, right? A lot of the benefits of running microservices and Kubernetes, people are porting their existing apps and building new apps and creating new microservices all the time. So Fusion running in that platform just makes it a lot easier to integrate. In addition, the ecosystem around Kubernetes is growing really, really quickly. And what's great about that is the tools and the applications, they're pretty much, it's very hard to find a modern, sophisticated application that you'd want to run in your architecture that doesn't support Kubernetes. An example of that is Spark. So Apache Spark, it's been integrated into Fusion for many years, and Spark has basically had in the past sort of their own cluster, what they called standalone orchestration mode, where you had a Spark master and worker. They also worked with Yarn. Well, recently Spark has adopted Kubernetes as its built-in orchestrator. And so with Fusion 5, we've been able to basically leverage what the open sources community is doing with Kubernetes, in this case Spark, to really improve our platform. So this ecosystem around Kube makes it basically just growing stronger and more tools and more applications available. So it's a very powerful platform that you're not going to sort of get stuck on because, one particular app doesn't support it or whatever. The other piece I think is very interesting is sort of just the whole installing, monitoring, scaling distributed apps as well as upgrading just has never been easier, right? So one example, we had a customer, they had a Kubernetes engineer, didn't know anything about Fusion really, but wanted to try it out. And within literally a few minutes, had Fusion up and running across multiple nodes as a cluster ready to scale, right? And the reason for that is because we've now turned Fusion, the problem of actually understanding how Fusion runs and scales, we've just turned that around and said, basically, we run Fusion in terms of Kubernetes, right? And so now general ops people can actually understand how Fusion works without knowing anything about Fusion or Solar. So it's basically you train the people on Kube, and now they have a fundamental understanding of how Fusion actually works. I think that's an important thing, especially since finding top talent, as you all know, is an extremely difficult thing in today's market. And then lastly, I think one of the surprises I found with Kube is sort of just resource efficiency. First off, as we know, Docker containers are a lot more lightweight than your traditional VM-based software and VMs. And so at that level, you end up having a lot less resources wasted and overhead to just run our various microservices in Fusion. And then the other piece is Kube tries to always achieve a balanced cluster for you automatically. So if it sees that, say, an indexing job is taking a lot of the CPU on one particular node, it might automatically move pods off that node to free up some CPU for that job to work. And so it's always constantly sort of monitoring the state of the cluster and trying to keep a balance. And the nice thing there is, especially when running in the cloud, you're paying for this compute, paying Amazon or Google for the CPU and memory. And so what you want is something that ensures that is, as efficient as possible. And I think that's one of the nice things about Kubernetes is it does this, it's built in. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, how you install Fusion in Kubernetes. And the way to do that is by a tool called Helm. It's very popular. Think of it as very similar to like the package managers we've had in Linux and things like that. So almost like an apt-get kind of package manager. And Helm deploys an application like Fusion, and we'll see in a future slide here how many like little moving parts there are now to a Fusion installation. Well, Helm makes that basically puts it all together and saves you and the Kube administrators from actually having to understand all the nitty-gritty details, right? So we've baked it into what's called a Helm chart that lays out all the different resources we need to operate Fusion in Kubernetes efficiently. Bottom line there is just Fusion 5 comes well configured out of the box by our Helm chart. And the nice thing is there's no more big multi-gigabyte download, any of these kind of things. Our Helm chart lives in a public repository. It's called Helm repository. And it's basically out at, charts.lucidworks.com. So with the Helm tool, and these would be commands your Kubernetes administrator would run. They simply add our repository, pull in the metadata about that, and then they run a Helm install command. And the nice thing is, again, Fusion comes well configured, but with any environment, you may have specific settings you want to run. And these are simple things like how much memory we want to give to Solar, right? So, it could be a larger heap if you're doing lots of faceting and those sorts of things. So you'll be able to control basic environmental specific settings like that. Another good one, as we talk about like auto scaling, is you don't have to worry about how auto scaling works as much as sort of your target metric that you want to auto scale around. Say it's QPS. So in the chart, you'll be able to actually configure the target QPS and not actually worry so much about the nitty-gritty details of horizontal pod autoscalers and those sorts of things. So Helm allows you to just apply some basic default overrides of what's already built into our chart. The nice thing is just to get started, you don't need to worry about any of these overrides. You can just essentially install our chart as is, and you'll end up with a multi-node distributed Fusion installation on Kubernetes that's ready to scale and ready to actually handle real workloads, right? And then the other nice thing is that, say we upgrade, our rules engine, for example. That's in the query service. It's a microservice in Fusion. Say we update that and we want to release some new rules. You can just use Helm to do a Helm upgrade, and that'll pull the new Docker image in for the query service and apply it to your cluster automatically. Again, it's something that happens by leveraging Kube. And, again, you'll have to decide with your IT folks and business folks on like how you want to do that upgrade, but the actual process itself is very simple. We've made this very easy, so at this URL will be some scripts to help essentially run these Helm commands. But at the end of the day, it's really this simple to install and upgrade Fusion. Okay, so when I think about the benefits and why we did all this, it was about a 9-month effort for us to re-platform Fusion, what was considered essentially a monolithic app that you could scale and you could deploy on multiple nodes, but it actually took a lot of just operations overhead. And I can tell you, and I'm sure some of you are shaking your head of like, well, we bought Fusion, we installed it, and then I had this like weeks or month-long effort of kind of building Puppet scripts or Ansible scripts sort of to manage it and automate some of these operations. All of that sort of overhead of operating Fusion really goes away now with Fusion 5. So it's all baked into our Helm chart running on Kubernetes, and you just use standard Kubernetes operations. I won't get into the command line ops you need here today, but it's all standard Kubernetes things. So if you train people on Kubernetes, then they'll be able to manage and operate Fusion very efficiently without having to know a lot of details. And for me, that really leads to what I think is just a reduced total cost of ownership. And there's a couple dimensions to that. First is, just let's think about human resources and staffing this. So a lot of our customers and prospects are adopting Kube for other applications. They're building microservices, right? And so they're training people on Kube. They're training, operations people. And now they can leverage those on Fusion to use Fusion as well. You no longer have to go out and seek, an operations person that has scaled solar and these sorts of things. So it really helps with staffing and human resource decisions and training, right? So that actually can be a very high cost for a complex app like Fusion. The other piece is just getting started, right? And getting to the interesting stuff, the predictive merchandisers and the AI that Aaliyah was talking about, the hyper-personalization. Nobody wants to do all this ops stuff. Those are just sort of necessary evils. What we're trying to get at are solving these harder problems with our data and things like that. So really just Fusion 5 allows you to get to those more interesting activities a lot faster, right? And so I think that just reduces the time to bring on new apps, as well as, just get started and iterate on these problems. And then lastly, one of the things about, the cost of ownership is upgrades. We're moving a lot faster now that we're based on microservices. You'll see releases and new features coming out of Lucidworks on Fusion much quicker. And the ability to sort of upgrade that and pull those changes in is now so much more streamlined. And I think that helps, again, with just the cost of ownership. And then lastly, I'll go into some of the technical details that we have around actually optimizing how you isolate workloads in a Fusion cluster so that you're not spending too much money on wasted hardware and those sorts of things. Okay, so let's take a look. And I drew this. This is think of this as like a whiteboard drawing. But I think the main takeaway here is not to understand every little box, but it's to realize that Fusion, as an application to solve digital commerce and digital workplace problems, really does have a fair amount of complexity, right? We have integrated in Spark and Solar and Zookeeper. There are microservices that you want to scale. There's microservices that do admin work and UI things. And so once you look at the system, you see there's actually a lot of really kind of complex moving parts. Again, the nice thing here is you don't really have to worry about all the details, right? That the Helm chart and the interactions in Kubernetes really handle basically all the complexity here for us. As a Fusion user, what you're concerned about are, say, meeting SLAs and SLOs. Like I want my query service to be able across the cluster to handle 500 queries per second, right? And so those are the discussions you can now have and not worry about, how does the query service achieve that? Because the ability to auto scale and the ability to wire in auto scaling logic on the query service to achieve 500 QPS, those are sort of baked in, right? The other piece about this slide I think is interesting is just realizing that we can pull in new services and add to this mix as Fusion continues to grow out. Or, for example, your teams can build their own microservice and have the query service wired in. I'll talk about that in a second. And then the other piece here is in sort of lower left are these orange boxes that I want to point out. One of the other, I would say, complaints I got as I spoke with customers and prospects is we like all the Fusion features, but we also need to be able to monitor and, collect logs and troubleshoot production issues and these sort of site reliability concerns. And so one of the things you get with Kubernetes, as I mentioned, the ecosystem's growing fast. There's a lot of companies focusing. What we get with Kube is just a nice, rich ecosystem of log analytics tools as well as metrics tools and things like that. So one of the things you see with Fusion 5 is just the ability to drop in, say, Prometheus is a fantastic database for metrics. You can put, say, Grafana dashboards on top of that or whatever. Or lots of different other tools also sort of integrate nicely with Prometheus, for example, like Datadog. Or if in your organization you've adopted maybe a new relic or a data log, it's very easy now to integrate Fusion with that. So all of our microservices produce fantastic metrics on their health and their performance, right? And so all of these metrics and logs now flow into Kube standard tools. So it makes it, again, a lot easier to operate. You trained your operations people on, say, how to use Datadog and use it effectively. Now Fusion just flows the metrics and logs in the Datadog. So again, it goes back to that sort of training and total cost of ownership there. In the past, we've had to kind of fake it almost to get Fusion plugged into various metrics and logging stacks. And now I think the story here is a lot smoother. Okay, let's take a look at, and I apologize, this is a bit of an eye chart. The idea here is in Fusion, we have a number of microservices working together for, say, query processing, okay? And one of the things we overhauled in Fusion was what was previously called the proxy. Now it's called the API gateway. It performs authentication, authorization, very sophisticated routing to all of our other microservices. So, it knows how to go and find the query service in Kubernetes and route to it, as well as like traffic management things. Like you can end up having two different, flavors of the query service and send, say, 25% of the traffic by our gateway to, a different version of the query service and these type of things. So our gateway is now built to do these type of sophisticated traffic management and routing capabilities, right? The other thing it does is it establishes JWT, which is a JSON Web Token for identifying users. So all of our microservices are secured, and you can only call them from one another by actually having a JWT, right? And that's something that didn't used to happen in Fusion. All the services behind the scenes, anyone can talk to them. Now they're all locked down with JWT. So it's a nice sort of secure feature that you want in a cluster like Kubernetes where there could be other services deployed in the same namespace or whatever. And so the gateway hands off, for example, a query request to our query service. It can do a couple of things. One, as Aaliyah mentioned, we have the data science toolkit integration. And what that is a facility for serving either Spark machine learning models or ML Leap trained machine learning models, which is another framework that sort of works with various machine learning toolkits. But more importantly, Python, right? If you've been following anything in the data science world, most machine learning professionals and data scientists have really kind of centered around the Python ecosystem. So something by running on Docker and Kubernetes, we now are able to support Python as a first-class citizen for serving, for example, Spacey has a fantastic natural language processing pipeline and models, right, for doing named entity recognition or whatever. Those are now built directly into Fusion's ML model service. So you can see a query coming in, having that pipeline call out to our ML model service to, for example, try to call a model to gauge query intent and those sorts of things. The nice thing here is we can auto-scale and scale independently the query and ML models services independently. All the nice benefits there of microservices. And then, of course, eventually we'll call down into Solar. Solar runs in Fusion, on Kubernetes. It's basically what's called a stateful set, which means it's attached to persistent disks, right? So this is a good view of how the different services in Fusion talk to each other. Okay, so before I wrap up, I want to speak a little bit about another sort of gem that came to me as we were building out Fusion 5 and learning Kubernetes. You know, my team had to go and ramp up on Kube and study and learn this stuff. And one of the just really kind of cool things that came out of this is what we call workload isolation, right? And some of you may have already tackled this with Fusion by having, you know, a search cluster separated from your analytics cluster. And in Kubernetes, we have what's called a node pool. And it gives us a couple of really nice things. First off, node pools allow you to run a mix of different hardware in the same kube cluster, right? And when you lay out which services go where in the cluster, you can tell Kubernetes, hey, let's put, say, our Spark pods that run Spark jobs out on, you know, the analytics node pool. And then let's put our query microservice and some of the Solar pods that are going to respond to our important queries and our lookups to sidecars like rules and signals aggregation. Let's put those on our search node pool, which has higher end hardware, better CPU, memory. Maybe you're spending for SSDs. Well, you don't want to pay for SSDs for running Spark jobs. There's just really no benefit, right? Like Spark's heavy on memory, but in the cloud, sort of memory is cheap and high-end disks are very expensive. And so what we get with these node pools is the ability to, across a number of different dimensions, lay out a Fusion cluster in a very optimized manner, right? And I'm not showing it in this diagram, but just to kind of make the point a little further is a lot of our customers like to sort of wait and run all of their Spark analytics. These are batch jobs, right? So you can think of signals aggregation or whatever. You know, maybe it's every 6 hours or every 12 hours or once a day. One of the things you can do with Spark now in this node pool concept is to spin up your Spark jobs and the executors on a node pool that's backed by preemptible nodes, or in the Amazon speak, like spot instances. Well, if you know Spark at all, it's designed to basically lose nodes. And the beauty, you know, sort of the caveat around a preemptible instance is on GCP, for example, Google can take that node away at any time. And so the nice thing here is preemptible instances are typically like a third or less the cost of other on-demand instances. So you can see, using a dedicated node pool backed by preemptible instances, you can really achieve a nice cost optimization for running your heavy Spark analytics jobs. And again, that won't work except Spark is sort of designed to lose executors and retry and, you know, replay the job when they lose particular partitions. And so this is a very nice way to lay out a cluster and optimize it. So Kube gives us the node pools. And then what we've done in Fusion 5 is take it one step further and leverage Solar's auto-scaling policies to essentially say, okay, I want my signals collection replicas to live in the analytics node pool. And so built into Fusion is this logic of how to lay out the various collections behind Solar in the correct node pool. And that's something we've done with Fusion, leveraging Solar's auto-scaling policies. And then lastly, the other thing you can see here is we can distribute a cluster. This is built into, say, GKE, Google's managed kube offering, is to distribute a cluster, distribute the nodes across 3 availability zones. Well, that gives you HA in the sense that we can lose, say, AZ1 and still remain operational with AZ2 and AZ3. And the nice thing there is when we lay out a collection, for example, like our primary, we tell Solar, hey, make sure you have a replica in each zone so that if we lose a zone, we remain operational. And that's logic, again, built into the auto-scaling policies that come with Fusion 5. So with that, I'm getting lean on time, and I want to leave room for questions. So, you know, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn it back over to Aaliyah.
Great. Thank you, actually. So Thanks, Tim, for presenting all of that, Aaliyah as well. Before we get started with answering some of the questions that came in from the audience, I want to point out some helpful resources about Fusion 5, and you can see them here. So you'll also see the assets listed in the resources box on your screen. Everyone who registered for the webinar will receive these resources via email along with the link to the recording and the slides. And it looks like we received quite a few questions from the audience, so we appreciate that. Tim and Aaliyah will do their best to answer a couple questions here for the remainder of the session, but if we don't get to your question today, rest assured, a member of the Lucidworks team will reach out to you. Now I'll turn it back over to Aaliyah for the first question that came in from the audience.
Thanks, Janessa. Okay, so the first question we're going to cover is, how do I try Fusion 5?
Sure. So the best way to get started is to go out to this Cloud Native link. There's a script out there for GKE. Soon we'll have additional scripts for EKS and OpenShift and Azure. But really what these scripts do is sort of make it very easy to, get set up with like GKE in this instance. The bottom line is you really just have to add our Helm repo and then install the chart as I showed in that one slide. So it's very easy to get started. Really, you just have to install Helm and have a Kubernetes cluster to use. And again, if you don't have one, you can try one, say, on Google, which gives like $300 free credit to try out GKE.
Thank you. The next question is, can I only run Fusion 5 in a cloud environment? What if I want to run on-prem?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the requirement for Fusion 5 is Kubernetes, and it's not definitely cloud. So our recommendation there are either, one, you can look at, on-prem Kubernetes offerings such as like OpenShift is a big one, but you can run Kube on-prem. There's nothing that prevents that. And then also, if you don't want to mess with all that, we also have just managed Fusion that we run all of this for you as well.
Thank you. Next question. What is the effort involved in migrating from Fusion 4.2 to Fusion 5?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Since 5 is basically just come out, we're excited for that. But the biggest concern with moving from 4 to 5 is not the config. That's a straightforward process of moving config. These are your app definitions and things. It's really moving the data, right? Because in previous migrations, we had to run a migrator that actually copied your Solar data, data directories and these kind of things. When you're moving over to Kube, that's not as possible. So what we really recommend there is a re-index. We have tools built into Fusion 5, such as the parallel bulk loader, to really make it easy to re-index from an existing Solar collection into a new one. If that's not doable, then that's where I think we suggest reach out to your Lucidworks PS folks and CS, and they'll help you kind of come up with a custom way to do that migration.
Thank you. Excuse me. Next question. We don't have a lot of Kubernetes experience in-house. Can we still use Fusion 5?
Yes. So I think there's some sort of FUD in the space around Kubernetes being extremely hard to run and operate, and I think that was really true several years ago. But as I mentioned in my talk, the ecosystem is growing fast, the tooling, the support, and all that. So really, I think it's a matter of, one, I recommend trying out in, say, a managed Kubernetes offering such as GKE or EKS or AKS. Those make it very, very simple to spin up a cluster and then deploy Fusion into it. Or, just there are lots of tools for actually installing Fusion, Kubernetes, and then the process is just running the Helm chart.
Thank you. This is a good question. When will Fusion 5 be released?
Okay, yeah, that one's an easy one. So we actually released it our first day of the Activate conference. So I forget the date. I think it was September 11th or 12th. So it's available now. Kick the tires. You have access to the Helm chart now. You can get going with it today.
Thank you. Does the platform come with ML models for AI-based search, or is it more of a framework for writing your own models?
Well, it's really both. So we do have, as I mentioned, there are open source models like Spacey and Scikit-learn and these sorts of things. And so those are bundled in just to make it easy to get going. We also have, obviously, lots of our built Spark models, so recommenders, classifiers, these sorts of things. And then soon, to just kind of look a little bit down the road, we're actually going to have a deep learning-based question and answering model that you can train. But right now, there's a number of different models built in, but then also your data scientists can build their own models using, Jupyter and the tools they love. Once they've trained that model, then they can load it into Fusion and serve it, with this framework, as you mentioned.
Great. And this next one will be our last question. Like Janessa said, we'll follow up offline for any questions we didn't get to. This is kind of a two-part question. So one is are JavaScript stages still supported? And then part two of that is, are there going to be Python stages for index pipeline and query pipeline?
Yeah, so the JavaScript stages are still supported. Unfortunately, we're still on Java 8, so it's still Nashorn. That was one thing I had hoped we could tackle. But we didn't get there this time. That'll be coming, in a future version of Fusion. We're going to upgrade to Java 11 and that sort of thing. But the JavaScript stages otherwise are still supported. It's just not the latest Java engine. And then as far as Python stages for index pipeline and query pipelines, we do not support that. However, I think you can think about the solution here as being we do allow you to, say, call out to a microservice over gRPC. This is how, and I showed in the diagram, the query service calls our ML model service, right? It calls out over gRPC and invokes Python code. So you could actually build your own microservice in Python, deploy it as a microservice, with Docker and using Kubernetes into the Fusion cluster, and then call out from a stage, right? So that's, it's not built-in Python support, but it actually is a very, simple way for you to introduce your own microservice to do some of this logic. But yeah, no, Python is not supported yet. We're considering that for a future release.
Great. Thank you, Tim and Aaliyah. It's been a pleasure to have both of you on today's webinar. Again, everyone who registered will receive the access to the recording and slides from today's session, along with the links to some of our Fusion 5 resources. If you'd like to get in touch with a member of our team, you can reach out to us by visiting lucidworks.com/contact. Feel free to send us a note there, and we'll get you in touch with the right people. Thanks again for joining, everyone, and we hope you enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you.